James Hunt is famous for his fierce rivalry with Niki Lauda, but few know the truth about their relationship. Hunt made a name for himself in two places, on the racetrack and in the bedroom. He lived a hedonistic life that many people would love to replicate, but when middle age came creeping in, Hunt needed to change his ways. Advice came from the most unlikely source. But did it come too late? James Hunt was born in Surrey, England, on August 29, 1947. When the family went on holiday to the countryside, Hunt had the opportunity to drive his first vehicle. This wasn't a race car, but rather a slow-moving tractor. Hunt wasn't even strong enough to shift the gears, but it wouldn't be long until Hunt discovered his need for speed. 1 week after his 17th birthday, Hunt got his license, and, according to him, that's when his life really began. Not long after, inspired by a friend's brother, Hunt began building and racing minis. But he soon realized that, although mini racing was thrilling, it wasn't enough for him. He had to push to the next level. In his first race, Hunt placed 5th. Not bad for a first-timer. Turns out, he could have done better. The reason Hunt came in 5th was that his car had a problem. Hunt had set the engine incorrectly, and it caused him to lose a very valuable 15 horsepower. With his engine set correctly, Hunt took a win at Race Circuit. He then moved on to Brandt Hatch, where he set a new record for the short circuit. Clearly, Hunt was on his way to become a racing star. In 1969, Hunt made another move, this time to Formula 3. To fund this move, he looked to a car sales company which provided him with a Merlin Mark 11A. Hunt used this vehicle to win a few races and get some high-place finishes. The auto racing world couldn't help but recognize his talent and need for speed. The British Guild of Motoring Riders took note of Hunt's accomplishments, and they thought he showed tremendous promise. That year, they gave 3 young drivers the Grovewood Award, and Hunt was one of them. On October 3, 1970, Hunt was racing in the Formula 3 Daily Express Trophy race. At one point in the race, he had banged wheels with Dave Morgan. Near the end of the race, Hunt was battling with Morgan for second place. In a heated moment, Morgan tried to pass Hunt. The result was a disaster. When Morgan tried to pass Hunt, the 2 cars collided. The impact sent both vehicles out of the race, and Hunt found himself sitting in a car with 2 wheels missing. He was furious and about to lose his cool. When the dust settled, Hunt saw what Morgan's dangerous move had done. He climbed out of his car and stormed over to where Morgan was. Hunt reached Morgan and shoved him to the ground. In the world of auto racing, this was a huge no-no. After the incident, both Hunt and Morgan had to face a Royal Automobile Club tribunal. Even though it was Hunt who got violent, Morgan was the one who was punished. He received a 12-month suspension. In 1972, Hunt joined the March team. When he took the 3rd-place prize at Mallory Park, he got a rude awakening. Hunt told Hunt that his vehicle didn't follow regulations, and he lost his 3rd-place prize. This was bad news for Hunt, and even worse, news was coming. Hunt continued to race with the March team, but then in May 1972, something bizarre happened. March announced that they were replacing Hunt with another driver. Hunt tried to get some answers, but the people at March clammed up. At this point, Hunt had had it with the March team. He decided to race at Monaco with a different team. The March team's director told Hunt that this was a bad idea, but Hunt didn't listen. James Hunt was quickly getting a reputation as a racer who didn't follow the rules. In 1973, Hunt joined Team Hesketh, which had acquired a March 731 chassis. Many viewed Hesketh as an unserious team, largely due to their party-loving attitude. This worked out perfectly for Hunt, as Party could have been his middle name. In 1974, Hunt met model Susie Miller and proposed just weeks later. However, his motivation for marriage was questionable. He saw Miller as a boost to his public image rather than a lifelong partner. What's worse, Hunt had no intention of honoring his wedding vows from the get-go. Hunt wasn't ready for marriage, and so to deal with his upcoming nuptials, he partied non-stop before walking down the aisle. In fact, he was intoxicated for 4 full days before the wedding. And when the actual wedding came, things got even worse. Hunt's marriage to Miller was quite the event. Some called it the society wedding of the year, but Hunt started the party way before any wedding guests had arrived. He started drinking in the morning and did not stop. Soon it was time to walk down the aisle, or at least try to. Of course, Hunt's bride could easily see how intoxicated her groom was. Miller smiled her way through the ceremony and hoped that all this craziness would be behind them once they were husband and wife. Well, things did not get any better on their honeymoon. Hunt and Miller were heading to Antigua for their honeymoon when Hunt mentioned that he'd invited someone to join them. This was team manager Anthony Bubbles Horsley, who had brought his wife along for the trip. So the men continued the party and left their brides to entertain themselves. Not exactly a romantic setting for the newly married couple. Sadly, things for Hunt and Miller were no better once they were back at home. Hunt was pretty much an absent husband, and Miller was quickly realizing that the marriage was a mistake. She turned to her new mother-in-law for advice. Hunt's mother loved her son, but she was well aware of his limitations as a spouse. In fact, she said that she would never want Hunt as a husband, but Miller didn't want to give up. She still had hope that Hunt would turn his life around. For exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a Factornate member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details. At the end of 1975, Hunt and Miller traveled to Switzerland to spend Christmas. Coincidentally, Richard Burton was also there with his wife, Elizabeth Taylor, a setup destined for trouble. Burton spotted Miller on the slopes and immediately set his sights on her. The fact that he was there with his wife, or that Hunt was present, did not dissuade Burton at all, and then things took a shocking turn. It was due in Brazil for the 1976 Grand Prix, and he had to leave Miller on her own. It didn't take long for Burton to set his plan for seduction in motion. While in Brazil, Hunt got a shocking call from Miller. Miller told Hunt that Richard Burton had invited her to go to New York with him. Hunt's stunning reply was, "Fine, off you go." Miller did go, and soon both marriages were headed for divorce. Awkwardly, Burton thought the right thing to do was to talk to Hunt. Hunt assured the actor that there were no hard feelings, but Burton thought he owed Hunt something, so he offered to pay a divorce settlement of $1 million. There is no way that Hunt would agree to this outrageous offer, right? Wrong. Hunt did agree. In fact, Hunt had no problem with the arrangement, and thanked Burton for taking Miller off his hands. James Hunt was a free agent, and he had a big wad of cash, but he was struggling on the racetrack. In racing terms, a retirement occurs when a driver withdraws from a race. Hunt faced retirements in Brazil, South Africa, Spain, and Monaco. What he needed was a strong finish, and the 1975 Dutch Grand Prix offered an important opportunity. The 1975 Dutch Grand Prix was plagued with wet conditions, forcing drivers to use rain tires. Hunt was one of the first drivers to switch to dry tires, a bold move that quickly put him in the lead. When he crossed the finish line first, the crowd erupted in celebration, hailing it as one of the greatest underdog victories in Formula One history. Hunt had just won his first Grand Prix, so you'd think he was set. But that wasn't the case. Hesketh had run out of money, and Hunt needed to look elsewhere. He found a position at the McLaren racing team and was excited to see what he could do with them. During his first year with McLaren, Hunt won an astonishing 6 Grand Prix. Tokyo was up next, and Hunt was on top of the world. He was now ready to let his true and outrageous personality shine. Around this time, Hunt was partying with motorcycle champion Barry Sheene. In Tokyo, the two went hard during the days leading up to Hunt's big race. But there were other things that Hunt wanted to do before the race. Some racers prepare for an event by abstaining from intimate behavior. Clearly, Hunt didn't follow this train of thought. His hotel of choice was the Tokyo Hilton, and every morning the lobby was full of flight attendants from British Airways. Hunt soon started up a daily routine. Knowing exactly when the flight attendants would be in the hotel lobby, he timed his arrival to casually bump into the British Airways crew. His approach was simple. He would invite them to his room, and, according to reports, they always said yes. His outrageous behavior didn't stop at the hotel. It followed him to the racetrack as well. While at the circuit in Japan, Hunt suddenly needed to relieve himself. Rather than searching for the nearest restroom, he simply dropped his pants and went right then and there. The crowd, many armed with binoculars, quickly took notice. When he finished, they reportedly broke into applause. When a young car designer mistakenly wandered into Hunt's pit, he was met with an unforgettable sight. Once again, Hunt's racing overalls were around his ankles, but this time he wasn't alone. A lady friend was with him, and they certainly weren't checking tire pressure. But Hunt had one more task to complete before getting behind the wheel. He had to take care of a final pre-race ritual, getting sick. Whether due to nerves or the excesses of his lifestyle, this was a regular occurrence, yet despite his unorthodox preparation, Hunt was more than ready to race. Against all odds, he went on to win the 1976 World Championship, with over 30 million people watching the moment unfold on TV. Now, an even bigger star, Hunt prepared to make his triumphant return to Britain. But before that, there was just enough time for one more party in Tokyo. Hunt continued drinking right up until he had to attend a reception at the British Embassy. The ambassador took one look at Hunt and had to question whether to let the obviously intoxicated driver into his own party. But the fun didn't stop there. The flight back to London was full of other racers and people associated with racing. What ensued was a party that lasted the duration of the flight 12 hours and completely emptied the plane of all those tiny alcohol bottles. Now, all Hunt had to do was land and greet his fans. By the time the plane touched down at Heathrow, Hunt was in no state to greet anyone. But that didn't seem to bother the 2,000 fans who had gathered to celebrate his victory. Shakily making his way down the airplane steps, he was met by his mother and girlfriend, who had to hold him up together. Hunt attended a formal gala where he was honored with the prestigious Tarmac Trophy. The Duke of Kent was on hand to present the award. While Hunt's acceptance speech was well received by the distinguished audience, his choice of attire, jeans and a t-shirt, was decidedly less so. On his way to the South African Grand Prix, Hunt's officials had a bad feeling about Hunt and decided to inspect his luggage. While they were likely searching for illegal substances, they didn't find any drugs, but they did get quite an eyeful. Instead of contraband, they found a colorful magazine filled with nude photographs. In South Africa, this was illegal. Hunt was briefly detained, but was eventually released. Trouble found him again in Canada. After having a collision at the Canadian Grand Prix with his own teammate, Hunt was furious. He got out of his car and punched one of the marshals. Even though he immediately tried to apologize, it was too late. Hunt was going to have to face the music. He was fined $2,000 for hitting a marshal. His other offense was walking to his pit lane when it clearly wasn't safe to do so. This resulted in a $750 fine. But Hunt's next incident would cost him much more than cash. It would cause severe emotional damage. In 1978, the Italian Grand Prix started off with a bang. A crash occurred that left racer Ronnie Peterson's car engulfed in flames. Having his friend in trouble, Hunt, along with two other drivers, pulled Peterson out of the fiery car. Things did not look good for Peterson. Even though Hunt had pulled his friend out of his car, Peterson succumbed to his injuries the next day in the hospital. The loss affected Hunt deeply and caused him to question racing and what he was doing with his life. In 1978, Hunt joined Walter Wolf Racing, which only had one car. Because it was a small team, it would feel closer to the first team Hunt had been with. James Hunt was planning to return to his glory days. Sadly, that didn't happen. While driving for Walter Wolf Racing, Hunt had to retire from the races in Argentina, Monaco, and Spain. In Belgium, it was worse. He crashed. Things were not looking good for Hunt. In 1979, he announced that he was officially retiring from racing. Now, Hunt had to figure out a post-retirement plan. It didn't take long for Hunt to be back in the spotlight. BBC Two wanted him as a commentator, but his life on the air was almost as controversial as his life behind the wheel. During his first broadcast, he popped a couple of corks and drank 2 full bottles of wine. It seemed that Hunt would not change his lifestyle at all, and his next marriage proved it. In 1982, Hunt met Sarah Lomax, and on December 17, 1983, they got married. Once again, the wedding day did not go to plan. Hunt was embarrassingly late for his wedding and showed up with no tie. The ceremony finally went ahead when Hunt's brother arrived with the missing tie. The marriage was not starting out well. Hunt and Lomax didn't last, and he soon found himself in debt. You see, his investments in Lloyd's of London went sour, and he'd actually lost the equivalent of over $200,000. That's when Hunt turned to an old friend for advice. During his racing career, Hunt had a famous rivalry with racer Niki Lauda. The public loved this rivalry, but in truth, the two were good friends. Lauda had a reputation for being serious and disciplined. He took one look at Hunt's lifestyle and told him to get his act together. He said that his life depended on it, and as it turned out, Lauda was right. Hunt seemed to heed Lauda's advice, and he started dating someone more down to earth. His new girlfriend was a waitress from Wimbledon named Helen Dyson. James Hunt cut back on his partying ways. He improved his health and even bought a bicycle. He was content living a quieter life with his family. The road ahead looked calmer and, hopefully, more fulfilling. On June 14, 1993, Hunt called Dyson with some exciting news. He wanted to marry her. Tragically, this marriage would never happen. The very next day, Hunt had a heart attack in his sleep and died. He was only 45 years old. Despite his fame for reckless behavior, Hunt was also deeply devoted to his children, a side of him that many did not get to see. His son Thomas has described Hunt as a devoted father with a very gentle, compassionate, and loving side. If you enjoyed this Fact in 8 video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to see in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.